Hello, everyone. Welcome to our Thursday live stream. It looks like we have a lot of people joining in already. My name is Pooja Mistry. I'm a dev advocate here at Postman, and it's good to see everyone joining in. Just let us know where you're joining in from in the chat. I'm joined with some amazing colleagues of mine, Deepa and Demian. Deepa, Demian, do you want to introduce yourselves?
Yeah, thanks for setting this up and hosting this, Pooja. Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Deepa Goyal. I lead product strategy at Postman, and I'm very excited about talking about all the key findings we have today from State of the API report.
Awesome. So it's great to see that we have some awesome folks. Demian, do you want to introduce yourself as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be here. My name is Demian McLean. I'm the senior editor who wrote most of the written content and put together the State of the API survey and the State of the API report for 2022 and for this year for 2023. And like you, I'm excited to talk about the findings and also take some questions from the people who are with us here. So yeah, why don't you kick it out, Pooja?
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I love working with some unique folks within Postmanaut. We all have different jobs here. Deepa is more involved in like the product space, whereas Demian is more involved in the content and surveys. And so we all have different jobs here at Postmanaut, at Postman, and it's kind of exciting to work with others to see what we're all doing. So but yeah, before we get started, I'd love to do this thing where, in case you missed it. So this is a session I love to do before, every time there's always new things happening at Postman. So I just wanted to share a couple of interesting things that's going on with Postman. So for those who have been working with Postman flows this year, it's been a big feature that's recently GA'd earlier in 2023. But there's a lot of interesting enhancements when it comes to working with Postman flows. So in case you missed it, you can now write descriptions within your flows as well. So you can generate flow descriptions. You can create a lot more interesting formatting with flows. So for example, you can group blocks together. You can set different colors of requests. So Postman flows is constantly being updated and upgraded. And I think we recently, we're definitely doing a lot of interesting stuff with flows. Anything you guys want to share on the flows end, Deepa, Demian?
Yeah, sure. Flows, I think, is very exciting since we see so many new developers and non-coders start to work with APIs. I think Flows is a very exciting tool that people who are just starting out with APIs can start using, or also people who are building a lot of applications at scale. So I'm really excited about Flows going GA and continuing building on the feature sets we have.
Yeah, awesome. I just posted that link in the chat for any of you who are Flows developers. Another exciting feature that you might not know about is that we have just recently introduced the Postman VS Code extension. So for those of you who are VS Code developers and are also work heavily with Postman, you can now use VS Code and Postman hand in hand. So this is also a really exciting development. So in case you've missed it, you can now work with Postman there. You can just install the extension and you're now able to kind of work with that efficiently. And then I actually recently posted this blog, which was all about the 5 essential API testing techniques. So Postman is, often, known as a testing tool. There's so many different types of testing techniques like end-to-end testing, regression testing, integration testing, contract testing, and of course, performance testing, which is a relatively new feature within the Postman platform where you can now use the Postman performance testing feature to kind of test your performance of your APIs. But a couple of other new things that you might have missed is that there are now workspace and collection templates. And these are really great. Actually, this is one of my favorite features, especially because I don't know about you guys, Deepa and Demian, but it's kind of tricky to start from scratch sometimes, So when it comes to working with like building your workspace, I really love how, this gives you a little bit of a like already a starting point depending on what kind of developer you are. So like I think they have templates for backend developers, testers. So this way you have a place to kind of start from scratch. So those are just a couple of new things that are going on in the Postman world. But today we're here to really talk about something that is very important to everyone. And we've done this report a few years now. So I wanted to have Demian kind of kick it off and talk to us a little bit about the 2023 State of the API report. So yeah, definitely give us some context there, Demian.
Yeah, for sure. So the State of the API report is essentially, it's the world's largest and most comprehensive survey and report of how APIs are used and how API developers are running their day-to-day job. And we've been doing it for 5 years. This year was our biggest response rate ever and our biggest report. We had 40,000 API professionals, mostly developers, who responded to our online survey. And the survey asks about 50 questions and takes about 15 minutes. So it's a decent ask of our developers, but we really find that we have an engaged community, and we're really grateful for the time they spent to tell us everything from the tools they're using, the protocols, how many hours a day they're spending working on APIs, and also what their thoughts are on some of the latest topics, such as monetization and monetization of APIs, as well as generative AI tools that they use in their day-to-day. So again, we've gone from, in 2020, we had 13,000 people respond to this online survey, and in 2023, we had 40,000. So it really gives us a pretty broad look at people who are working with APIs, everybody who from, people who are sort of non-developers like technical writers and user interface specialists to people who are full stack developers, senior developers with more than a decade of experience. And so I'm excited about this year's report, which is out now for everybody to see. And also I'm excited to take some questions too and see just what our audience who's with us, what their feedback is on the report.
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, a couple of things that I find that amazing that we were able to get 40,000 developers this year to take the report. So I'm a little bit interested in how do we come up with the right topics and questions to ask developers when it comes to some of these surveys, and then what time of year do we send out this report as well?
Well, we've sent it out a little bit earlier in the last. We used to send it out sort of autumn in the northern hemisphere, maybe September. We would publish a report in about September. So this year we got it out earlier. We got it out in June, and in 2024 we're looking to get it out even a little bit earlier in the year. So you may see another State of the API survey coming in early 2024 into your inboxes. But as far as how we come up with the questions, we talk, of course, closely with the Postman developer team, who are in touch with our customers. We talk with people in sales here at Postman who are in touch also with everybody from, well, they're mostly in touch with some of our larger enterprise customers. And importantly, we pay attention to what our users are saying on social media platforms like Twitter and LinkedIn. And this year, I also reached out to probably about 24, I guess you could call them API influencers. Some of them work at sort of adjacent companies to Postman. Some of them are just independent. Some of them are journalists. And asked them, what are some questions and themes you would like to see discussed in this year's State of the API survey? And so that was all really useful in helping come up with sort of what is top of mind for API developers and API users.
Definitely. So if any of one of you have tuned into this live stream maybe last year, I was actually with Deepa and Demian. We had I think a bigger panel last year, but we went through the 2022 State of the API report. And I feel like at that time we only got like around 30,000 or so participants taking that survey. And we came up with 6 key findings. But one thing I noticed about 2023 is that we have 7 key findings. So I thought that was the biggest difference, but I wanted to take this time because since these are key findings in the survey, let's kind of dive a little bit deeper into each of these key findings and talk about why they became the key findings for this year as well. So I wanted to have Deepa. Deepa, did you want to share any of your thoughts on maybe some of these findings as well?
Absolutely. I think considering how extensive this survey is, and increasingly we're seeing so much participation, it's really interesting to see what findings show themselves every year. And I think in the past year, as the industry has shifted a little bit, I think awareness around APIs has grown. At the same time, there have been some slowdowns, some layoffs. So industry dynamics has really changed. So it's really interesting to see how that has impacted the data that we get, the inputs we get from people, and what is top of mind. So one of the first key finding we have is actually how APIs are a moneymaker for most organizations. It's always interesting to see how money really drives all these decision making. About 2/3 of our participants said that their APIs were actually revenue generating, which I always find really fascinating because a lot of times people tend to think of APIs as like a piece of infrastructure. But as soon as we start to think about them as revenue generating, you're really building that idea of APIs as products. And I think that's really a fundamental shift in how APIs are being looked at overall in the industry.
Yeah, let me dive a little bit deeper into this one, just reading more about monetization. So it sounds like this report is broken up. Just before we kind of go into the report, let's talk a little bit about how this report is broken up. Maybe Demian, you could give a little bit of insight into like how this table of content was kind of built.
Sure. Well, we've modeled this as far as the organization of the report. We've modeled it very much after past years to make it easily sort of scannable and to compare how metrics have changed over the past years. But as you mentioned, we did add some new sections this year on monetization and AI tools. So is there more? Let me know if there's something a little bit more specific about the table of contents you'd like to know.
No, yeah, I think I just wanted to kind of talk about the design and the structure. But when it came down to monetization, like APIs are a moneymaker for most. Like, are there any specific key metrics that we want to kind of talk about here?
Sure. Well, I think that probably one of the things to note is while about 2/3 of our respondents said that their APIs do generate revenue, when you drill down to look at those who say that yes, they generate revenue, 43% of those said that these APIs generate more than 1/4 of their business's total revenue. So there are some very significant contributions that APIs are making for some very large companies.
Okay.
In fact, for like in the financial services sector, for example, we had quite a number where APIs generated more than 75% of these companies' total revenue. And we found that, for example, smaller organizations, they tended to have less people say that their APIs generated revenue. So we see a little bit of difference, but we do see that generally as the company scales up and grows larger, as measured, say, by developer headcount, we find that it's increasingly likely respondents are generating revenue from their APIs.
Okay, great. So I think like going back to, thinking about APIs as a product, what does that really say? Like that kind of confirms that theory, correct? Or
I think so, yes. I think increasingly APIs are being viewed as products. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Anything else on the monetization end that you guys wanted to point out?
Yeah, I think one of the things I want to kind of dovetail into is I think we will be talking about it a little bit more, but mostly as we think about revenue, we're also seeing that people who are non-developers or people in leadership positions are starting to interact with Postman. So I think this is kind of a new dimension of data that we're starting to see in our report as people in leadership or management are starting to actually interact with our platform or at least participate in the survey. So we're getting to see a little bit of their perspective, and that's where the insight into the revenue being of importance and pricing being a topic of conversation is starting to show up.
Yeah, that's actually a very great point. This year, when we broke down who took our survey, we found that 53% of the people were non-developers of the 40,000 or so who took our survey. And that's up from 50% in 2020 and smaller percentages in previous years. So increasingly, we're seeing, for example, this year we saw increased representation in the State of the API survey from chief technology officers, managers, and directors. Again, developers are still the largest percentage of respondents for sure, but we are seeing that non-developers are increasingly embracing APIs, and it's tools like, for example, Postman flows, which is sort of a low-code, no-code approach. Those are really helpful for these non-developers who are starting to work with APIs.
Awesome. Yeah,
I was going to say, like, do we call them non-developers or do we call them low-code, no-code developers? Because I feel like we're converting them. We're just enabling people who have traditionally not been developers to be able to develop. And I think there's a lot of overall industry initiative around making APIs more accessible to people who don't necessarily code. So it's really interesting to see that balance switch actually from majority developers to now majority non-developers. And I think it has a lot to do with the increased awareness and people's interest in working with APIs, along with the tools that enable them to do so without having to write code.
Right, definitely. Especially, I mean, like if you're building integrations with anything that involves APIs in a lot of the ways. So it seems like that's a lot of people's roles in industries is like just like getting things to send data to other things, right? So I can totally see that. So all right, let's jump back into our 7 key findings. So the next one, we're kind of talking about the API pricing increase matters. So any thoughts on that?
Sure, I'm happy to talk a little bit about that. We found that this year we saw a big jump in the number of respondents who said that API pricing is a consideration when they decide whether to integrate or use an API. And I see that somebody in one of our listeners here who's watching us said, how do users pay to use the APIs? And that can be a number of ways. It could be usage based. It could be just sort of a monthly subscription, sort of like SaaS service. But there are a number of ways, but you can definitely meter these things. And the prices that people are paying for API usage is more of a consideration this year. We think this may reflect a more cost-conscious API consumer, given that there has been some downsizing and contraction in the tech sector over the last year. But what is also interesting is, on the other hand, we found that an overwhelming majority of respondents said that API investments, that is what they spend on API investments, time, money, is going to increase over the next 12 months. That was 92% of respondents said that, and that's up from 89% last year. So we have two things going on. One is people are really recognizing the importance of APIs and plan to invest more in them, but they're going to be a little bit more price conscious when they decide how to use those investments and how to deploy them.
So do you feel like, is it because working with APIs in 23 has become more expensive, or?
I don't think it's become more expensive, but I think maybe what you're seeing is that there may be tighter budget constraints. You may, I think you just have a little bit more cost-conscious executives and owners of either companies or organizations that are interacting with APIs and deciding how to invest their money. And I think that's, that probably reflects a number of macro factors. The cost of money is much higher now. Interest rates are, essentially close to double where they were just, a couple of years ago. And so, people are just, they're deploying their resources maybe a little bit more strategically and taking a little more time and consideration when they decide where to actually spend that money.
Yeah, that's actually really great. Go ahead. Sorry.
I think to some degree this is related to sort of leadership being more aware and involved in the decision making around APIs, combined with the other economic slowdown related factors. I think as leadership is starting to get more involved in revenue generating APIs and overall decision making, there's just more oversight onto how does the pricing work? Is the pricing good, or should it be reviewed, or should we consider a new pricing strategy? Considering there's multiple pricing strategies possible for APIs, it could be usage based, or it could be transaction based, or it could be subscription. Just people are starting to look at it afresh to see, like, these revenue generating APIs, what's the opportunity there, and trying to innovate on that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just wanted to take a quick second just to acknowledge the people from all over the world who are tuned into this live stream. I see people from Uzbekistan, from India, Ethiopia, Germany. I see people from Denver, Colorado, which is a lot closer to us. I'm here in Virginia, Chile, Tehran, Tunisia, and so from all over the world. Thanks very much, everybody, for tuning in. We understand that it is late in the evening or early in the morning for some of you.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, like, I almost want to talk about that to segue. I know we're going to kind of bounce around and kind of jump it through this survey a little bit, but since we're talking about such a global group of people tuning in, I think maybe we can even dive into like the global growth of APIs in a way. Like, I really love this map. I think this is something new from this year that the team did that is different. So one thing that we have grown this year is Postman has grown to over 25 million users, I think, from 2022 to 20 million users. So that's been a big growth on our end, but it looks like we have 50 nations or more that have created collections and requests. So I love to see how global the usage of this product is, which I really think this map is pretty cool in terms of like the various collections that are created in different countries. So
quick moment. I read somebody's comment that my mic wasn't working so well. So do you think this is better? I did change my mic.
Yeah,
it is a little better.
Sound a lot better now.
Awesome. Thanks. But getting back to the topic, I think this is a really good segue into the next key finding, which is how outlook for API investments has brightened. And I think the global map showing all the countries that are engaging with our platform really demonstrate how investment in API has really gone up, and how people are really starting to overall what we're seeing is I think 92% of our participants said that their investment in APIs were either going to continue or increase in the next 12 months, which is really interesting considering all the cost-cutting considerations that are going on. But at least for the API space, we're seeing people are still interested in investing more. And this map is really a great demonstration of how universal and across the world that sentiment is.
Yeah, for sure. And it's pretty neat to see like the growth of it in terms of like on a global level. But just diving a little bit deeper into just investments, like I'm gonna go take a look at this outlook just to kind of to see a little bit about more information on investments. Anything we want to point out on the outlook for APIs and more?
Well, I will say that I did mention earlier that 92% of respondents said that APIs investments into APIs would increase over the next 12 months. But we decided it'd be useful to drill down a little bit and see, like, well, what do developers think? Well, what do executives think? Do they see things the same as far as investment into APIs over the coming year? We found that when we polled just CEOs, we found that they were more bullish than developers actually as to what sort of investments into APIs would be deployed over the coming year. We found that when we looked at just CEOs, 53% said that they would increase investments in the coming year, whereas developers seem to think that only about 44% of developers seem to think the same thing, that investments would increase over the coming years. So it suggests that there is perhaps a strong recognition at the top of companies, in the CEO office, that API investments are a priority over the coming years. That is, these are the ones who are saying just that it's going to increase. They're actually going to spend more in 2023.
So what does that mean? So, like, you think that means that CEOs are going to spend more money in creating APIs or using third-party APIs versus, like?
I think it's an overall investment in their API products, which could be hiring more developers, could be investing in infrastructure tooling to increase, for example, developer productivity, even in terms of maintaining or securing APIs. Those could be some of the areas of investment, as we will talk about more in some of the later segments. It could be various aspects of running an API program in any company. Depending on the size, I think there's different priorities that different organizations have, and based on that, these investments would vary.
Yeah, definitely. That's a pretty interesting, I think, outlook coming just on the CEO level versus like the development level. And yeah, I think the one big thing that even I have noticed this year, which is, of course, AI, is like 2023 is all about, working with AI, using AI. So let's take a good moment into thinking that. Do you feel like this is what's driving a lot of the investments, the outlook, maybe some of the other 7 factors?
I think AI just means more APIs. So
exactly.
A lot of AI products are actually delivered through APIs, and as that excitement around AI has grown, of course, more people are using AI to help them in their day-to-day responsibilities, as well as people are just more interested in exploring these AI-related APIs. So there's actually interest on all sides. And I think what we saw, it really confirms that 60% of API professionals said that they are using AI for their job, which is super fascinating. I did not expect it to be that high. So I was really thrilled. Demian, I would love to hear a little bit more about this.
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely. So as you said, 60% of our respondents said they were using generative AI tools. The most common uses were to find mistakes in code, to produce code, and also just for coding instruction. Among industries, we found that there were some that were more likely to use these AI tools than others. The highest rate of uptake, with 65% of survey takers, was the education sector. At the other end of the spectrum, those that were least likely to be adopting AI tools at this point were government and defense. And some respondents did tell us in the survey that there were security risks or corporate bans on sharing data with third-party AI tools. And that does make sense if you consider the sort of work that the government and the defense sector are involved with. We also found, what was interesting, I thought, was that senior API developers, those with, say, 5-10 years of experience, were much less likely to use AI tools than, say, junior developers, unless these senior developers were trying to generate documentation and comments with AI. But otherwise, we did see that there was a little bit of wariness, and I think we have seen in some of the media coverage of AI that these AI tools can deliver answers with complete confidence that sometimes are wrong. They'll sometimes make things up. Sometimes they'll produce code or ideas that maybe don't work in real life. So anyway, it's a lot of growth still to be there, but as I think, as Deepa was saying, we're going to see, I think, as the use of AI grows, so will the use of APIs, because many of these AI tools are powered by APIs. They use APIs to fetch the data, and I think increasingly we're going to see that people are building APIs not just for humans to interact with, but APIs for AIs to interact with. And so we're going to see, again, a greater emphasis, I think, on APIs as AI grows in importance.
Yeah, we have an interesting question from the chat, and maybe this is something you guys can answer. So, do you see a trend to restrict API usage over data usage to train generative AI?
Well, it's too early for us to say, at least based on this survey, if there's a trend, because this is the first year we've asked about generative AI in the State of the API survey. But I think that you are going to see probably continued caution among industries where their data is closely guarded, and that would include defense, some sectors of government, and certainly the financial services sector. So I guess the answer is to be determined. But I think right now there is certainly a lot of people embracing AI. Whether caution grows towards using these tools, especially third-party tools, we'll just have to watch and see.
Yeah, for sure.
Absolutely, it's really interesting to see the difference between different segments of the industry starting to approach AI. I think, like for example, education has the highest uptake of AI tools, at least from our survey. 65% of survey takers said they were using AI tools in the education domain. And it's really interesting to see how heavily regulated spaces like financial services and government and defense are not going to just jump in and start using some of these tools. But I think overall, there's still a lot of developer productivity value that AI has brought, and to some degree, even if developers earlier in their career are taking this AI assistance in some way that is contributing to their ramp up time being reduced and them just onboarding faster. So there's definitely a lot of developer centric value that AI brings. So although there is some scrutiny and oversight that is going to evolve over time as these tools continue to be used.
In fact, that's a really good point, Deepa. We actually asked our survey takers, can you quantify what sort of productivity benefit you expect tools like, say, ChatGPT or Copilot will deliver to development over the next 2 years? What sort of productivity benefit? And there was wide agreement that AI will deliver a boost in developer productivity. And about 45% of people said that productivity boost will probably be on the range of 10% to 25% boost in productivity. That's over the next 2 years. We found that there was a small percentage of people who said there'll be little or no productivity benefit from AI tools, but that was only about 1 in 10 survey takers. So there seems to be some agreement that these things will actually enhance productivity when it comes to development.
Yeah. Well, I'm actually more curious how this is going to kind of affect the API economy in a way, because I've seen that this affects pricing for other companies creating APIs that generate data to train some of these LLMs, for example. Like, I think Joyce actually had a really interesting TikTok about this. It was about Reddit changing their pricing structure for their API because now a lot of these generative AI models are using some of that like data. So I feel like there's going to be a shift in the economy, or at least the API data economy. So I'd love to, I think that kind of goes back to some of the other points that we were talking about like pricing and investments and things like that. So how do you guys kind of see like the economy and the culture changing, especially in the API landscape a little bit changing because of AI now entering, or not entering, but being a big player in the market, I guess?
I think building on the Reddit example, for example, they changed their pricing strategy to discourage people from building competing apps. And it's really interesting how this sort of looking at APIs as a key part of business strategy is emerging, which impacts everything from looking at what additional features you can deliver using APIs or how you can monetize them differently. So we're definitely seeing a lot of shift in people experimenting with different pricing strategies. Like even Twitter changed their pricing strategy to target a different audience. So there's a lot of shift happening in the industry. Some of it is I think AI, because of AI and conversation around it, but I think a lot of it just has to do with more people getting involved in the API decision, API as a product decision making.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think this is funny. I just saw some like memes about just AI or generative AI in that way, that like, because the economy is kind of shifting and people are changing the API pricing models and things like that, like where a generative AI would be able to learn is still going to be like, the data is going to be so old. So by the time like humans want to catch up to what's happening in like 23, 24, maybe it's still like trained on maybe older stuff. So I'm just curious how this will kind of shift. Like, where do you guys see the future of this kind of going? Like the future of.
I think the interest in APIs and in AI ultimately is just going to, with improved developer productivity, with new pricing models, is just more opportunity for new products to emerge. And I'm sure that people are going to continue to innovate, and there's going to be just more products, both in APIs and AI space, that do different things. And I'm sure that as this evolves, there's going to be shift in how data is generated, because we're also getting data generated by AI that is merging with human generated content. So that's going to shift how much data is generated, how it's evaluated, and what are the opportunities for new products to be built in that space.
Yeah, and I found this a little interesting, Demian. So it seems like, of course, generative AI powered apps takes first place in terms of like, AI, but IoT, I think that was a little interesting to me, how IoT kind of came in second place. So in terms of like the strongest segment in which AI is kind of a big factor. So yeah, this is some interesting data for sure. All right, so I think we can move.
Just to quickly answer your IoT question, we're seeing a lot of new products. Like if you've heard of Samsara, that's for commercial use cameras for commercial vehicles. So we're seeing a lot of innovation in the IoT space that inevitably is starting to use a little bit of AI. For example, trying to monitor or guide people in, for example, the self-driving cars are a huge IoT, AI-based IoT application. So that's really where, like, when you think about IoT, it's that you're thinking about self-driving cars, you're thinking about smart cameras that are doing a different kind of notifications, even including like nanny cams that have notifications. So a lot of those things fall in that IoT segment.
For sure. You're in San Francisco, Deepa. Are you seeing these self-driving cars everywhere now?
Absolutely, they are everywhere, and it's so easy to catch a ride. Basically, they have their own apps. Cruise does, and I think Waymo does too. And you can literally call a self-driving car the way you can an Uber. So
have you ridden?
Very interesting time.
Have you ridden? Are people? Have you ridden in a self-driving car?
Yes, I have.
Right.
And it's really fun because, some things I find really fascinating. Like, for example, there's no driver. So when you walk up, you have to unlock the car from your phone. So the user actually has the power to unlock the car. And one of the things is, considering there's no driver, people feel very comfortable as like this is a private space. So having a phone call or anything, just people just feel a little bit more safe. and comfortable in it. And I think the comfort in like trusting a machine driving you around is slowly increasing. I felt like maybe a year or so ago, people were much more skeptical, but people's outlook is changing towards AI, and now people are a little bit more curious and just more open to experiencing self-driving car experience.
Yeah. Well, I feel like the experience still reminds me of like when you watch, I don't know if you guys have watched Silicon Valley, but Jared getting in his self-driving car and ending up on a cargo ship. So I mean, that's a little scary for me, but it's good to know that you find them pretty safe and reliable. So, but cool. Yeah, I feel like this is I love to see the shift of something like this kind of change the market in a way, and especially in the API front. So I think that's a really cool finding that we've kind of tackled a lot more this year in 23 compared to other years. But let's kind of dive into some other things. So most API professionals are using AI to help them code. So I think we talked a little bit more about that. We talked about AI as an assistant. So you're saying that you had mentioned, Demian, that most people are using them to find mistakes in their code, or so like I guess like the use case is more like teach me rather than build it for me. What do you think?
I think that's probably accurate. It seems I think we've discussed, it's embraced a bit more. Generative AI tools are embraced a bit more by junior developers than senior developers, who have, I think, probably more confidence in their own abilities and to actually create code. But as an assist, yeah, absolutely. I think it's definitely.
I think one of the things to note here is also people are using AI for things like generating comments, generating documentation, and for example, people are also doing like suggest ideas to improve my code and things like that, which I think are going to ultimately improve quality of code, because previously people didn't. I mean, spending time writing comments is of course not something everybody's always able to do, and improves maintainability of code. Documentation is an important factor in making APIs usable. And one of the things we'll see later in one of the key findings is just the top of mind priorities for people is quality. And I think ultimately having the tools to help fill some of these gaps will ultimately drive better quality APIs coming out of the development teams.
Yeah, and I just wanted to take this time just to introduce Postbot, which it's not GA'd yet. So I guess this is a good segue for us at Postman, which is Postman's new AI assistant. So this is still, it's not GA'd yet, but you can sign up for early access. But this is going to, I think, change the game when it comes to testing for Postman. So essentially, you have this AI generated tool that helps you test and visualize and kind of do a lot of really interesting things. Have you guys played around with this yet?
Absolutely. I find it really exciting to see just tests being generated automatically. I feel like, and we did actually find, I forget the number, a lot of people feel that there's not enough testing being done on their APIs. And I think this is a straight like solution to that problem, that one of the top of mind concerns is we're not testing our APIs enough.
Yeah.
And now you have some tool that helps you do that, considering we're also seeing layoffs. So a lot of teams are shrinking. So with shrinking team size, you have more responsibility on people to do some of these things. And a tool like Postbot really helps people sort of take on some of those testing responsibilities and being able to do them. So I think that's where tools like Postbot will really shine in driving that quality of development while teams shrink, but also like improving the quality of the product.
Definitely. Awesome. So we spent quite a bit of time on the AI front, which was an exciting aspect of this year. But just moving on to let's kind of move on to that. Let's talk a little bit about API leaders. So I know Demian, you had some thoughts on that. Yeah, API first leaders. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. So we did inquire with our survey takers just to what degree they consider themselves API first. Taking an API first approach to development, and just to sort of define that, essentially, when we talk about API first, we're talking about companies that really place a priority on building the APIs before they actually start coding the product. That is, treating in fact, it involves really treating APIs as the building blocks of software. And there are some real benefits to taking an API first approach. People who are API first, that is, take this API first approach, they find that these companies tend to be more productive, create better software, and integrate faster with partners, which all have real benefits. And we actually asked survey takers to rate themselves as far as just how API first their approach was. And the ones who are most API first, who rated themselves, say, a 8 or 9 or a 10 on a 10-point scale, we found that this group produced APIs faster and also encountered fewer failures than your average respondent in the survey. And we also found that when an API did fail, that these API first leaders could restore it faster, usually in under an hour. And we're seeing more and more people identify themselves as API first leaders. This year, 11% of respondents said that they were highly API first, and that's up from 8% in each of the prior 2 years.
Yeah. So this means that they're like, as an API first leader, like what kind of characteristics do they embody, I guess? Like, what would you?
Well, I would say that, I guess, as far as characteristics go, we see some of the we see that one industry that has higher than average percentage who are API first leaders and taking an API first approach, for example, is financial services. Mm-hmm. That's also an area where APIs generate a larger than average percentage of revenue than, say, in other industries. So taking an API first approach sometimes goes hand in hand with API monetization. And there are some real benefits from an API first approach too. We asked, for example, does being an API first, taking an API first approach affect how fast you onboard new developers? And we found that about a third of respondents strongly agreed that yes, it does. We found that as companies grew larger, say, for example, a company with 5,000 developers or more, over 40% of respondents said that yes, it definitely helps onboard companies faster when you take an API first approach. So there are definitely some benefits to taking an API first approach, and of course the Postman platform is set up to really sort of amplify some of those benefits and make it even easier to take an API first approach.
Cool.
I think when you think about API first, it's really just how you view your APIs, and that really drives everything from like not thinking of API offering as an afterthought, but really thinking of it as an independent offering from the company, which allows for better resources to be allocated to building and developing and maintaining APIs, and also monitoring. Just there's a little bit more care and attention put into monitoring these APIs and setting the metrics. So a lot of the API first leaders are actually actively setting metrics to measure the success of their APIs, which is allowing them to monitor closely how frequently they have failures and do take on initiatives to mitigate those risks. So ultimately, they're just further in their journey of having more mature API offerings, which allows them to also better respond to incidents when they happen. And larger organizations tend to have more business dependency on these APIs if they are customer facing, and that means that every minute of that API is down is costing probably millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And that priority really drives the emphasis in being able to monitor and address incidents as soon as possible.
Right. And
So
yeah,
we're seeing that in all of the data.
I mean, I'm seeing that in this piece of data as well. Like the quality is like the number one priority when it comes to APIs compared to reducing the costs, which you would think that, you know, cost plays still a pretty big role. So this is kind of interesting as well. So in terms of like priorities for organization when it comes to maintaining their APIs, correct? So.
Absolutely. I think quality is driving a lot of the decision making. To some degree, I actually think of security as part of quality, but we do have it separately broken out because increasingly security has for the longest time been discussed as like the top of mind priority for anybody building APIs. But I think later in this report, we talk about how companies are seeing fewer security breaches actually than they did before. And I think that's a direct result of this awareness around API first and working on these priorities. So we're seeing this evolution of like our biggest pain point is security, and then people have invested in it over time, and now we're seeing an improvement in that space.
Yeah, this one is interesting too. API integration price is a growing concern. So I mean, security comes hand in hand with performance here, in terms of like how secure your integrations are, how fast they perform. So this data totally makes sense here. But I'm curious how popularity is a little bit lower on this scale. Yeah,
I think popularity is probably because we're seeing so many special purpose APIs. So if you think about a lot of these financial services companies, for example, and actually we have a chart on how people have majority internal APIs. Next, they have about partner APIs, and public APIs form a very small percentage. But the thing is, anything that's a partner API, for example, you might have a single customer, so it might be you're driving all the other metrics. You don't really need popularity for special purpose or built for a specific customer kind of APIs, and I think that's probably what's represented. That's my guess.
Yeah. Anything else we want to kind of dive a little bit deeper to on the API first point of view? Any other charts we want to? I know we have. We're thinking to talk about a couple of things later, but I'm happy to move on to, I think, so the next, we have two more key factors. So when developers exit, they leave a big hole. So this is very interesting because API, it just shows how important API development as a practice is, right? So yeah,
I think it's the impact of layoffs.
Yeah.
It's really like what is the impact of layoffs that's showing up in the data here. And as developers being I think the most I think one of the most impacted by layoffs, we're seeing that impact in just how APIs are performing, or concerns around APIs. And I think one of the things that stand out is outdated documentation and zombie APIs. And I think those are really important aspects of APIs, because when you think about documentation, if your APIs are not well documented, they're probably not getting to be used anymore, or people are not able to discover them because they're zombie APIs. So if you have APIs nobody can discover, it's just out there, they're useless now. It's probably going to be rebuilt, which is increasing your cost. Ultimately, if you have to rebuild the same thing you built before just because you didn't know it existed. The other thing is zombie APIs tend to be one of the biggest security risks. So as developers are being laid off, there is a direct impact on how APIs are being maintained and their upkeep, and I think that's having an impact a clear impact
Mm.
in terms of all these other aspects of having zombie APIs and the risks that entails.
Wait,
Yeah.
this is kind of funny. Somebody responded on the survey about zombie APIs. That's like, didn't even think about that. So
Yeah, they're a real security risk. If you have an API that has no owner, no oversight or maintenance, and it can be forgotten by the company. And these zombie APIs, as they're called, they can definitely pose a security risk, and they can definitely deliver a poor consumer experience again if they're not being maintained and being observed.
cool. Yeah, I mean that makes sense. And I know that we went through such a shift in the market in early of 2023. It's probably still happening, but do you feel like if we were to project the future because of some of these holes, I guess, that are in our in the market, like do you feel like 24 is going to look like we're going to be making up for that, like back to hiring more API developers, addressing some of these security changes? Like if you were to just project.
Boy, that's tough to put my neck on the line for that one. We have industry analysts who sort of study these things obsessively. Just from my own sort of corner of the world and just what I see, working at Postman and sort of observing the landscape, it feels like we've turned a little bit of a corner as far as the pace of downsizing with software developers. Software developers have been in the tech sector, as far as layoffs go, software developers have been the group that has been hit hardest as a percentage. So that can't continue indefinitely, and I feel like I think we may have turned a corner. So, but we'll see.
We'll see. Yeah. I'm curious what the 2024 report is going to look like, whether AI kind of fills that gap or fills that hole. I don't know if it's there yet, or if it's
I don't think it's there yet. I don't. It's still very much a developing technology, it seems.
Yeah.
But as we noted in our report, people are using it as at sort of the more entry level tier of software developers to generate some code, to find mistakes, etc. So, but yeah, it'll definitely have a growing place in development. But then so will tools and low code tools like Postman's flows. You don't need to necessarily ask. You don't need to necessarily have an AI tool if you've got something that's sort of low code and helps you build it yourself. In sort of a non-code based fashion.
Yep.
I think what we're seeing is with layoffs, if a team shrinks, sure, they can have some assistance from AI, but at the same time, we're seeing people investing more in APIs. And I think combined with all those factors, I almost feel like this interest is going to drive development of more APIs. So we'll see a faster pace, which comes at a cost. And it's probably, we're going to discover some of the aspects that get lost in this sort of fast-paced environment with the shrinking team size. And it will be interesting to see, do people go back to like hiring more, or do they go into getting more tools to fill that gap, and also just what vulnerabilities emerge from this dynamic.
This is an interesting question. So I'm just going to post it on the screen. So I think Nidhi had asked, I'm currently a junior backend developer, mainly working on APIs. What should we do to overcome the fear of AI? Is there fear of AI, which is interesting. So
it depends on what the fear is from Nidhi. I don't know if Nidhi is still on and listening.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good question. There's, we did ask, we didn't put this into the report because we weren't quite sure how to show the results. We did ask an open text question where people would just type in an answer. What are 2 or 3 words that come to mind when you think of AI? And, some people did punch in words like scary, Skynet, if you remember from the Terminator, Terminator's franchise. So there's definitely some concern about it out there. And I guess I don't have a neat answer to what we should do to overcome the fear of AI. It seems that it is here to stay, and I guess all we can do is proceed, I guess, as cautiously as possible. But that's, of course, that's out of at least my hands. You know, you've got whole companies like OpenAI that are focusing very much on that, and yeah.
For sure.
I think it's really interesting that there is the fear, and I think of fear in terms of AI as like two major themes from what I've seen. One is like, can AI take my job? And the other is, will AI do a good enough job? So I think a lot of senior people, as we discussed in some of the charts earlier, senior people are very skeptical of the mistakes AI can make very confidently. It's like it can very confidently give you information that is inaccurate, and people who don't know better will believe it. And the other aspect of like fear of AI taking our jobs, I feel personally, the way I think about it is when at first when ChatGPT came out, I was like, oh my God, will people write content anymore because AI can generate so much? But the reality is that AI doesn't have opinions.
Mhm.
And I think people's opinions and people's ideas are still not something AI can replicate. So when a developer is solving problems, I think their way of grasping the context of the problem, their knowledge of the tools and the products and the institutional knowledge that they have is not necessarily something that AI can replicate. So I think to a huge degree, AI can assist you in doing some mundane tasks like documentation or something that you want to sort of be done with quickly so you can get back to your real problem solving. But I don't think there's any need for being afraid of AI. It's an assistant here to help us.
Definitely. Yep, I agree. Yeah, it's definitely an interesting culture shift that I'm seeing uh, uh, um, in this market that we haven't seen before. So it's interesting that we focused heavily on it in this survey. So we have one more question, and I don't know if this is the right spot, but it's all about how APIs can improve code completion in like development environments. So I personally haven't worked with like PHP storms, but if you're talking about like IDEs, like one, I think I shared this a little bit earlier, is that we do have an integration with VS Code as an IDE. If you can working with like API development is now being integrated more into IDEs. But I see like GitHub Copilot, that's like a IDE integrated tool. Do you guys have any thoughts in terms of like integration, like IDE integration in terms of like API tools?
Well, I won't try to speak for the product development team, but I know that we are interested in basically being, Postman is interested in basically being compatible with, I think probably just about any IDE really that is mainstream. VS Code is a great example, and I would just say stay tuned. So yeah, I think that there's another question too that just popped up, Pooja, that is interesting. Somebody said, do you have any idea what percentage of APIs are exposed externally by organizations versus what they only expose internally? And in fact, we asked that very question under a day, a week, or year in the life.
Okay.
There's a section there called public, private, or partner. And so we asked respondents what percentage of their APIs were public, private, or partner.
Right.
And we found for the first time in 3 years, organizations are adding private APIs at a faster rate than public and partner APIs. So overall, our respondents said 61% of their APIs are for internal use only. And that's up from 58% in each of the prior 2 years. Not a huge jump, but still the first movement we've seen in 3 years. We found that public APIs constitute a smaller share this year at 14% of organizations' APIs. Now, as to why the shift is going on, maybe it's possible that Deepa has some ideas, but one thing that seems clear from this finding is that the emphasis on private APIs, it really underscores the need for tools that help teams internally catalog, document, and collaborate on their APIs. What do you think, Deepa?
Absolutely. I think I always find this chart, this is one of the charts I really look forward to, is trying to understand the split between the internal partner and external APIs. And it's always fascinating to see how public APIs are such a small percentage of the overall API population across the board. But those are often revenue generating APIs. So they're probably a skew towards public APIs and partner APIs when it comes to revenue. But ultimately, as this investment in APIs is growing, people want to build more APIs. They're seeing more opportunity, means they're going to have more APIs, and both internally, externally. The idea of like, how do you discover this huge volume of APIs as a developer? When you join a new organization, it's a challenge to kind of go through the catalog. And I think cataloging APIs has become even more prominent of a problem because of this dynamic. Is people are just building more APIs, and that means we have to make sure that internally or externally people are able to discover these APIs, so they're being used. Otherwise, we're just building infrastructure that will remain unused or not utilized to its full potential. So as we try to solve some of those problems, we're actually seeing a lot of people solving that with Postman private network now, and where we also introduced a partner network recently. So we're actually enabling people to solve some of that cataloging problem. And Postman also generates documentation automatically for its collections, and that's also helping some of this problem, is just being able to generate this extensive documentation across so many APIs. So this is definitely something that is always evolving, but right now is a very key moment where we're seeing this tipping point of increased interest and growing population of APIs.
Yeah, no, that's so interesting, because I mean, as a dev advocate, I am lucky enough to go to a lot of conferences and meet a lot of people in person, and that's one question I ask a lot of folks on their API strategy, is like, how many public APIs do they have? How many private? And I noticed that public APIs are not as prominent versus like more private. And that's an interesting take, that, you know, maybe people are more focused internally on cataloging and things like that. But just, you know, something that if you might have missed it, for those of you who are still on this stream, if you are interested in public APIs, Deepa and I did a stream, I think last year, about our public API network. And I just wanted to just share that. So if you just click on the Explore tab of any of our web pages, you should be able to take a look at any of our public APIs that are available within Postman. So that kind of goes a little bit into discovery as well, discovering of APIs.
And there's a great chart for those who are following along and looking at the state of the API report. It's under global growth of APIs. Maybe maybe you can pull up Pooja. And then if you scroll down, you'll get to a section called Most Popular APIs. We looked across the Postman Public API Network, which is the world's largest public API hub. And we wanted to see which API collections were forked most over the past year. And you'll see some names in there you recognize: Salesforce, WhatsApp Cloud, Twitter. But there are some others that maybe are a little less well known. For example, MongoDB Data API and Pipedrive API. So this is a really, you know, discovery of APIs is one of the real challenges if you're a producer of APIs, having people discover it. But the public API network is a great place to start to discover APIs that are already popular, perhaps, and well known, and ones that are up and coming.
Yep, cool, definitely.
I really want to highlight the importance of this, because when we think about public API, Postman with its millions of developers, and the public network is really a place where organizations are increasingly seeing it as the place they can showcase their APIs and make it easy for developers to discover them. in the public network. And I used to be the product manager at PayPal, and I shipped the PayPal API collection last year.
Huh.
So I think it's really fascinating for me to see how from early last year, it's just been a little over a year, the impact that we've seen PayPal have and how it has grown into being one of the top collections on the public network.
Mhm.
So it's enough that in just a year, it has had enough impact that it was actually mentioned in their quarterly earnings call as something that a place where they were able to bypass Stripe as one of the most popular collections on Postman platform. And I think we do actually have a quote from Dan Schulman right there under that chart.
Great.
So it's really amazing to me how people are getting value out of solving the discoverability problem using the public network. And it's just how that investment is changing over time as this becomes a priority in many organizations.
Yeah, definitely. And like, I mean, on the public network, you can just go ahead and fork any APIs here and kind of get started with them. So for those of you who are just interested in just public APIs, Postman's a great platform to discover them. And I think we have one more. Go ahead.
If you're a product manager or an engineering leader managing public APIs, I think publishing a Postman collection is like one of the lowest lift, highest impact thing that you can do in 2023, 2024.
Definitely. So yeah, take a look at our public network. We have some amazing people at Postman, especially in our partner space, that we can, help you kind of set your documentation up there. So yeah. All right. So we have one more key finding that we didn't really jump into, and it's our last one, which is API security, which is a big aspect, right? So API security is improving, but some sectors have work to do. So let's talk a little bit about security before we wrap up.
Sure, I can take this one. So we did see that in 2023, and this global survey taker said that they had fewer API-related security events. 56% of respondents said that incidents happen less than once a year. And that's an improvement from last year when only 52% of respondents could say the same thing. We thought it would be interesting to break out the results by country, and we did see some stark differences. We found that security incidents were rarest in the US, with 2/3 of respondents saying that API security events, 67% of respondents said that these events happen less than once a year. So that's an even greater percentage saying that than say the survey average of 56%. In Europe, the Middle East, Africa, we did see a lower number of people who said that these security events were as rare as once a year. And in the Asia Pacific and Latin America, only 47% could say that API security events happened less than once a year. So some differences we see geographically. I think we may be seeing a greater focus and greater awareness of APIs as a route or as an avenue to really guard and to safeguard and stay on top of as far as security goes and monitoring. And we talked earlier about the risk of zombie APIs, and that's something that I'm hoping that there's a greater awareness growing, maybe slightly because of this report, but just being aware of just how many APIs you have out there that might be exposed and need to be managed.
Absolutely. For many years, we saw security as the primary concern that organizations had when it came to APIs. So I think there has that focus that organizations have had on security is now showing as the security incidences slightly reduce, at least in some areas. I think security is a complicated problem to solve, and I don't think it's going to be solved overnight. So I think as this awareness around, hey, APIs are vulnerable to security attacks is growing, there is also a lot of hiring going on in the API security space, a lot of innovation going on in that space, and that's ultimately sort of driving some of this improvement that we're seeing. and just increased focus. And I think and I hope that as that continues, we continue to see this frequency of API security incidences shrink
Well,
over
let me
time.
ask you a question, Deepa. We did ask respondents about which API security risks pose the greatest concern for their organization, and the top answer was improper authentication, authorization, or access control. What are some ways or tools that people can sort of avail themselves of to really help with authentication, authorization, and access control?
So I think a lot of the risk that comes from this area actually is, when you look at stats, it's going to be mostly from zombie APIs, because it's because when you're not actively maintaining an API, the credentials can get outdated, and that's actually where a lot of hackers can target your APIs to get into your system. So this focus on just also thinking about authentication, authorization, and access control more carefully is starting to grow. For example, things like role-based access are becoming more and more prominent topics in people who are building APIs, so that even if there are vulnerabilities, we are careful in like who has the right access and really protecting not just the overall API in terms of access, but also like subsets of features, and making sure that the right people have the right access, and there's just overall more oversight into the access and activity of users on any APIs.
Yeah, that's interesting. And we do have a question about that. What do you attribute to better API security, like OAuth, like authentication, I guess. But you kind of talked a little bit about role-based access, like working with, tackling the zombie APIs. I feel like that's a very hard thing to tackle, like the zombie ones, especially when, developers leave and it's like you don't properly document things. It's like, seems like something that can really slip under the cracks, right?
So that's exactly why API governance is starting to become such an important topic of discussion. And we also launched features last year to offer better API governance across the development lifecycle of APIs, is because how do you keep track of APIs in a large organization where you have thousands of APIs? And if you do that over the whole lifecycle of APIs, then that gives you the opportunity to identify when certain APIs stop to meet your standards, or stop to grow in terms of usage or maintenance, and that should really come up in your governance radar, is these APIs are falling off and we need to do something about it and get alerted. So that's really where people are trying to solve this problem with governance, better governance model. And we actually have a really cool product where you can essentially have, you can set up these rules, and as developers develop their APIs, they can get notified of the rules that they might not be meeting, so that it's not even like something that you will learn later, but it's really while you develop. If you are more aware of some governance rules, then hopefully you're developing APIs that wouldn't fall off the radar. So a lot of companies are thinking of it from first principles and just trying to establish a better API governance model that would effectively drive identifying zombie APIs or identifying any other vulnerabilities and enabling their teams to address them.
Yeah. And this is a great point by Jack about just like regulation, HIPAA, GDPR. So I do agree with this this point that Jack's made about API security on regulated platforms. But yeah, I feel like we've gone through quite a bit. I mean, going through the 7 key findings, there's so much in this survey, and I think Demian, I guess it was your team that really worked on creating the survey, spreading the knowledge of it, and capturing all the data. So it's been great. We've gone through quite a bit. I know we only have like 10 minutes left for today's session, but I just wanted to ask any other call to actions from you, Demian. I know that anyone who's interested in this survey, you can share this report, with, I guess you can share this report within this link itself, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. We encourage people to share it. We've had investment banks like Goldman Sachs, share portions of the State of the API report and some of their own investment research. We're always encourage people to share it. This is pretty close to a sort of almost it's pretty much a public document for people to use. We just ask that if you're going to cite it, if you're going to use this, just cite it as Postman, and the terms are outlined there. But yeah, absolutely, this is a document that is not really possible to create without the contribution of a lot of time from developers, 40,000 or so who contributed this year. And what our next step is we're going to take the survey findings, because they're much broader than we can put into this 50-page report. We're going to take the survey findings from 2023 and we're going to put them in a public workspace on the Postman Public API Network, and people can do some of their own research. They can do some crosstabs. Developers at organizations in this industry with 5,000 developers. What are their priorities when it comes to producing an API, or what are some of their biggest obstacles? And people can do some of their own findings and research. So stay tuned. We will be sharing that publicly as soon as that's ready to distribute. But we do really believe that this is a project that really is sort of the fruit of a lot of different people, a lot of different contributors outside of Postman. So we really want to do as much as we can to share those findings and make them useful and relevant.
Yeah, definitely. And, I love that we were able to kind of dive deeper into the data, kind of do a little bit more storytelling around it, because of course you have the numbers, right? Like, there's only so much you can kind of get from the numbers, but then coming up with the conclusions as to like why this is happening, what is the market we are in currently, the impact and the role of new things like AI on, like this was not something we did in 22, so right. I'm curious, I'm really curious how 24 is going to look,
Me too.
I'm curious, like what aspects of the key findings are going to change, if those holes are going to be filled, or are they going to get deeper, so it's interesting, especially when looking at these surveys, to kind of like tell the story of like what the world kind of looks like today.
Yeah, absolutely. And it wouldn't be possible to tell these stories without a lot of people inside Postman. And I'm here representing the content side, but we've got a group of designers, visual designers, who made this report look beautiful. We've got people who are engineers, software engineers, and web devs who helped create things like the spinning globe that you can look at collections and tests on, and really just bring this report to life. With great visuals, great animations, and it really is a project that involves a couple dozen people. So they can't be here all today, but a big shout out to them.
Yeah, I love this visual. This is actually probably my favorite visual in this
report.
Fun to play
with, isn't it? Yeah.
And
I really love the fact that we have developers in Antarctica
using
Postman.
Yes, we do. It's not on this map because
it's
the rest of the world.
Yeah, but it's part of the rest of the world. But there are a handful of developers down there in sunny.
That was really fun.
Yeah.
I think, as we saw from this report, we are seeing more and more people, not just developers, but also low-code, no-code developers and non-developers starting to contribute to the API economy. I'm also very fascinated to see how these people will for example, we saw business analysts, network engineers, and UX UI designers start picking up working with APIs. And as we introduce tools like flows, for example, that allow people to build and work with APIs without writing code, I imagine that they're going to build new things. So I think by next year, we would have a whole new dimension of all the great things they've done. And that would open a whole Pandora's box for us to learn from, and it would be really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. No, this has been so much fun, just kind of diving through this report with both of you and kind of talking about a lot of the changes and the trends and how different this year is compared to next year. So I really appreciate both of you joining me today and going through this. I hope to do this every year and kind of dive through more key findings. A couple of things before we drop off that we have coming up. So we have a really interesting Postman Intergalactic session that's happening next week. So for those of you who are GraphQL developers, be sure to check out this event and register, and you can learn a lot about testing and developing GraphQL APIs with Postman. So this is a new session. So Intergalactic is our program where we teach people how to use the tool itself, and we try to give a deeper insight. So feel free to take a look at that, which is coming up next week. So other than that,
that's really cool, and it's immediately followed by the GraphQL conference as well. So it's a great way to step into that.
Yep, definitely, and I'll be presenting this one as well. So you'll see me again on this session. So, but yeah, other than that, I think this has been a great session. Thank you both, Demian and Deepa. Always a pleasure to work with you and learn from you both. So,
and thank you to all the people who tuned in from around the world. I see we have somebody, we have people from Sri Lanka who've tuned in too. And thank you everybody for your thoughtful questions and your comments. And yeah, we look forward to doing this again with the 2024 State of the API report.
Yes, of course. And it looks like today was a great session. A lot of people got some good insight from it. So I definitely appreciate that. So, all right, on that note, let's bid adieu, and we'll
see you all.
See you guys next time.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Bye-bye.